A lot of caregivers have a complicated relationship with the word meditation. You might have tried an app or a class or a video, and the message you got, even if it was unintentional, was sit perfectly still, be calm, empty your mind, don't get distracted. Meanwhile, you're running on 3 hours of sleep, your phone is on loud in case the hospital calls, and your nervous system is on high alert. For many carers, that version of meditation feels like one more thing to fail at. Today's conversation is for you if you're carrying a constant background level of stress, you crave even 90 seconds of real exhale, and you need practice that works with your nervous system, not against it. My guest is Jeff Patterson, founder of Northwest Fighting Arts, Portland Tai Chi Academy, and the Yielding Warrior. He's spent over 36 years practicing and teaching meditative and martial arts, blending qigong, tai chi, and what he calls the yielding concept. Jeff teaches the 5 basic regulations that sit underneath any meditation practice, and he helps people build meditation that actually fits their life. Ritual, active, and philosophical practices that can evolve as seasons change. Today, we're talking about how carers can use meditative arts in tiny, realistic ways to support their nervous system, their body, and their sense of inner strength, without needing a silent retreat or a perfect morning routine. Jeff, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Before we dive into techniques, I'd love to start with how you came to this work, because you've been practicing and teaching for so long. Jeff, for listeners who haven't met you yet, how did you first come to meditation and the meditative arts and martial arts?
Well, as a child, I was always interested in the martial arts. However, I never had the opportunity to partake in any classes or practice. And so it was just something that was always in my vision. And in my later teen years, I got the opportunity to go train at a martial arts academy in my hometown. And I really liked it. It was a lot of fun. It was what I was expecting. And that led into Western boxing, which became a strong passion of mine in my later teens and my early 20s. And so much so that it was 5-6 days a week. I was always at the boxing gym and just trying to be the best I could. And at this one gym that I used to train at here in Portland, Oregon, one of the coaches that was there was a very well-known coach. He had created champions of both the amateur and professional level. And I really wanted to get to spend some time with him, but he had a full card. He wasn't looking to take on any new athletes. And I would just always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there, and I'd work hard. I'd try to get him to notice me. And after about 3 or 4 months of doing this, he finally started giving me some tips and showing me a few things. And it was only maybe 2 or 3 weeks of getting to work with him a little bit when he said something to me that changed my life forever. He told me that if I wanted to be better at boxing, that I should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. Now, at the time, I was this dumb 19-year-old kid who didn't know much of anything, thinking, isn't that for like older people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter in the ring? And I had a lot of respect for him, and I decided to follow his guidance. And not only did it change my ability to perform in the ring, but I started seeing all of these other things in my life start to shift because of this new practice in my life. And through the years and running my academy here for over 32 years, I've had thousands of students come through the academy and through my online programs. And I've heard hundreds of stories through the years about how the meditative arts has positively influenced people's lives and some of the transformations that they've gone through. And that's what's made me so passionate about trying to get out there and spread the message about meditation and how to integrate this into your life. And that's how I originally got started.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's such a journey when there's this moment in your life where you kind of have that crossroads where I can either do it or I can not do it. And it's amazing the difference of stepping into and taking that risk to try something new, to have it have a reward. Because there's always that unknown of, is this going to work for me or is this not? Am I going to embarrass myself by doing this, or am I going to make leaps and bounds and possibly change the rest of my life? What kept you with this practice for over 36 years. Was there a particular season where meditation and qigong really became like a non-negotiable for you?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was very challenging because, like most things, it's not something where you can just turn on a switch and start seeing all the benefits. And you need to put in the time and the effort. And every day when I would show up at the boxing gym, my coach would ask me, "So how is your meditation? How you been practicing?" And so the last thing I'd ever want to have to say was I didn't practice today. So I was very diligent and I would practice every day just to make him happy. And so my intentions weren't as true to the practice as they could have been, but I kept at it in hopes that it would make me better in the ring. And there was a period of time, maybe around the 3 or 4 month mark of starting the practice, where I really started getting discouraged and wondering, why am I doing this? I don't see anything from it. It seems like a waste of time. And at the time, I was doing about an hour and a half a day every morning religiously. And I'm sure that he could sense that and feel that, because when he'd asked me about it, I'm sure he heard the tone of my voice. While it was there and I was doing the practice, it just wasn't sinking in. And then I remember it was maybe about the 6 or 7 month mark when I went down into my basement in the morning to do my practice. I looked up at the clock and an hour and a half went by and it felt like 15 minutes. And I don't know what happened, but I just kind of lost sense of time and had this almost euphoric feeling of being in this practice. And from that point on, I was hooked. And once he noticed this change in me, he started showing me a lot of stuff, but he was waiting for me to have that realization in order to start giving me things, because I think if I wouldn't have had that, a lot of what he was teaching me would have went right over my head. And once I had that realization and I started seeing the benefits and the value in the practice, it started shifting with my priorities, in that now I always wanted to be doing my practice. And not only would I do my hour and a half to sometimes 2 hour practice in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, I'd add in a half an hour or an hour there and try to throw in a little bit more. And so it was really starting to become a way of life for me. Once I was on that path, I just never turned back, or never had the desire to turn back, because I saw so many benefits from the practice that I just never wanted to stop.
That's beautiful, because to go from it being more like a chore at the start to having that surreal moment of peace and just being in it rather than working through the mechanical steps of it. It sounds like it was just a moment. It wasn't planned. It just happened unexpectedly, which I think is beautiful. And you've created what you call the yielding warrior method. What does yielding warrior mean to you, and how is that different from the usual ideas we have about toughness or discipline?
Yielding is a concept used in both the meditative and the martial arts, and it's something that I've been very inspired by and found a lot of value in. And, my last book, The Yielding Warrior, is all about the concept of yielding. And in that book, I break down the three main pillars of yielding, which are physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. Physical yielding is the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force, and now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. Now, it's obvious to see how this can be beneficial in a combat situation or athletics, where we're often faced up to opponents who are bigger, stronger, and faster than us. And if we try to meet all of their resistance head on, we're going to lose a lot of those battles. And so with yielding, we're able to lead their force into an area where they're not as strong and respond where it takes less effort from us to get to where we need to go. Now, in order to be successful with physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed. The mind has to be present, and the breath has to be smooth and even. Now, It's a lifetime journey to really master these skills. However, from day one of integrating a meditation practice into your life, you start seeing these things with more clarity inside yourself. And when that happens, not only do you see them more clearly internally, but you also start to recognize these things more clearly in other people. And this is where it starts to become very interesting. And now we're moving into what I call mental yielding. So, say, for example, you and I are having a conversation and I say something that unsettles you. And because of my heightened awareness through this practice, I become very in tune and I'm aware of the changes in your breath and your expression and the subtle changes in your tone. And I pick up on that right away. It's a lot easier at this point to adjust the conversation and keep us on a harmonious path than if I wasn't paying attention to that. And pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. And so learning how to use yielding in all of our interactions is extremely powerful. Not only are you being more considerate to others, which is something that we could all do more of, but it allows you to be strategic and guide conversations to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And this is great for business, sales, negotiations. It's great for your own interpersonal communication and your relationship with others. I mean, there's so many applications to this. Then the third pillar of yielding is emotional yielding. This is very much like mental yielding, but it's with our own interpersonal communication. So you think about many times when something happens to us, we'll respond and we'll go down this path. And we might get an hour, a day, a week down the road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding and our heightened awareness and ability to stay more present, we're able to sit back and notice these things as they're changing. Before we get too far down that path, we're able to make adjustments and oftentimes make more educated choices that save us a lot of heartache down the road. And I've been explaining this idea of yielding now for many years. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say is, yielding makes a lot of sense. In fact, I do yielding all the time. Well, I would agree in that I think everybody does some degree of yielding all the time, whether they label it that or not. However, it's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years. I guarantee you that person would see things about the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And the meditative arts helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe most people will go through life and never have any clue of. And so yielding is not about giving up and being weak. It's about being strategic and recognizing these imbalances so we can get to where we go with the least amount of resistance.
I really love that your version of the warrior and yielding isn't about toughness. It includes softness and responsiveness, not just push through at all costs, which I think when I apply it as a caregiver, our conversations with doctors, medical practitioners about what is happening in our homes when we have such a short time to invest or see them 10-minute windows, 15 minutes at most of the time. And you're dealing with so many different personalities. And as a carer, you are heightened or hyper aware in a different way to your loved one's change in health, breath. It's more as a stress response to be active in making sure that we don't have a crash and we're not going to end up in the emergency room. So it's more about the hyper aware rather than being present in the moment and noticing those changes. It's a shift in the environment that you feel because when you go into a medical trauma, that's what it's like. There are people running around everywhere. There's beeping and noise and trauma involved. I really love the difference between being soft, being able to look in and being able to recognize where you are for yourself and being able to articulate, be able to mentally work out a better way that is not combative if something isn't going right. So thank you so much for explaining that because it does set up a beautiful transition from the way as carers we are reactive, the way that we are hyper aware. It presents a different way of being so that it's not chaotic. that we can reach a peaceful journey, because this is long term. And that's what at JMB Inspired and Radiant Moments, we're really trying to support carers in, is to find peaceful paths and different ways of still doing their job of being a carer, but gentle to their own soul, their own health, and their own well-being. So many of our listeners are carers who at one point or another have tried meditation and found it really frustrating, or they feel like they can't do it. And I'd love to clear some of that up and give them a different way of seeing it, from an experience where maybe they can't calm their mind because they're like, oh, I've got to get the medication right. And so not being able to find that inner peace. So from your experience, what do most people, especially stressed, busy people, get wrong about meditation?
One of the most common things I'll hear people say is that I've tried meditation and it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. And somewhere along the way, I think people got this misguided idea that in order to be successful with meditation, that we have to reach this state of peace in the mind where nothing can bother us. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And in fact, I've spent my entire career studying with meditation practitioners all over the world, and I have never met anybody who doesn't get distracted, no matter how successful or deep they are into their meditation journey. And so everybody does. It's the way of human nature. But the idea is that with meditation, say, for example, you're doing your meditation practice every day, and maybe it's a sitting practice or a movement practice like Tai Chi or qigong. It doesn't matter what it is, but during that session, you get distracted 50 times in 20 minutes. And every time you get distracted, you recognize the imbalance, you use your breath, your posture, and your present and awareness to bring yourself back to center. Now you just got 50 repetitions of how to be out of balance and find focus. And if you do that every day, every month, every year, you start to develop this power and this ability that in those situations, like you were saying, when everything's chaotic and there's sounds going off and everybody's stressed, you're able to come back and not get too far down that negative path or those distracting paths and come back to center and stay present. And in doing this, you can see that it affects everything you do, whether it's a conversation you're having with somebody else, or it's a high stress environment, as many times caregivers are faced with, or in athletics, if you're an athlete and you're looking to perform in front of thousands of people and you have all the stress and pressure of the performance side of it, as well as what are you going to do when somebody's trying to take your head off. And so all of these things, it helps you be more focused. And that's why so many people these days, performers, athletes, people understanding what the benefits of meditation are turning to the practice because they see that it really can help in all of these scenarios.
There seems to be these misunderstandings, because what you just described is powerful. Recognizing that even people who have been doing this for years and they have been passed on from one person to another, that they also get distracted, and being able to come back is the skill, not to prevent the distraction, I think is a powerful aha moment, because it's not been described like that. Because when you see people in movies or in society doing meditation, they're sitting peacefully, they're calm, and it looks like they are not distracted. They're in the zone. And so to know that in 20 minutes, 50 times you could be distracted, and that's a lot of power to come back to center, to know how to do that effectively. So how do these misunderstandings show up for carers who already feel like they're failing or never doing enough?
Well, I think if somebody's interested in the meditative arts and they're looking at it as a vehicle to help them under stress and to help them with performance, that it's real important to approach the practice from the right mindset. And through the years, I've been teaching for a long time. One of the most challenging things for me as a teacher is, how do I get people to see the value in the practice, and how do I get them to be consistent so they stop looking at this as a chore they do every day and start looking at it as something they get to do and that they're lucky to do because they see so many benefits in it. One of the things that I've been teaching lately lately, and I find that it's really helpful for new students, is something I call the three considerations. The first one is, what is it that's drawing you to the practice? Why do you want to do the practice? And once you think about that and put a little effort in there, maybe it's to perform better on the field, or maybe you get anxiety and panic attacks and you're looking for something to make you feel more comfortable when you go to the grocery store, or whatever that is for you, then think about 10 or 20 things that will positively change if this practice helps you accomplish that goal. After you put some heartfelt time, then flip the coin and think of 10 or 20 negative things that will continue down the path that you're already facing, and that could change for the negative if you don't do this. And what this does is it helps give us the fuel for those days that we all face when the alarm goes off and it's time to get up and do our practice, and we feel like hitting the snooze button because we're tired. When you see the benefits and you really understand all of the life-changing things that are going to happen by doing this practice, when that alarm goes off, you're like, I've got to get up. This is my time. This is what I'm looking forward to. And that mental shift right there makes a big difference. The second consideration is understanding the importance of consistency, because I think a lot of people come to the practice and think meditate once or twice a week and that should help. You want it to be a way of life. It's not meant to be a hobby that we do once in a while. And that doesn't mean that you need to retire to a cave and meditate for the rest of your life. But if you just did a little bit every day and then integrated some active practices throughout the day and started living the lifestyle, now you're really going to get the benefits. But you have to approach it with this idea that consistency is important. And there's this story that I really enjoy about this old stonecutter who's really well known all over China. And his work is so unique and beautiful that anytime somebody sees it anywhere, they just know that it came from him. And because he's so well known, people from all around will come and stay with him for a few years at a time and study and learn the trade from him. Well, every day, this old stonecutter, he walks down to the river and meditates first thing in the morning. And one day after his meditation session, he's walking along the river, and he has this profound vision of this big 6-foot tall mystical Chinese jade dragon. And he's so taken by the vision that he just knew that this had to be his next project. So he spends the next few months traveling all around looking for the perfect stone for his new creation. Finally, when he finds a stone, he brings it back to his place and he sits with the stone day in and out, just studying the stone, feeling the energy from the stone, trying to envision how this dragon will soon appear. Finally, one day, he picks up his hammer and his chisel and he starts tapping away at one specific place on the backside of the stone, hundreds, if not thousands of times to the same place, and nothing was changing. A few days went by and still nothing. A few more days went by and thousands of taps to that same spot and nothing. Some of his apprentices started second-guessing him and thinking, why doesn't he try something else? It's not working. A few more days went by. Finally, he taps a stone, and this big 3-foot section separates from the stone and creates a smooth, slightly curved line that will soon be part of the dragon's back. One of his apprentices who was watching said, how did you know that that strike was going to break the stone? And the stonecutter replied, it wasn't that strike that broke the stone. It was the thousands of strikes before it that broke the stone. And with a bit of a discouraged tone, the apprentice said, but I've been watching you and there was no change. Why keep doing the same thing over and over? And the stonecutter got down on one knee and he felt the smooth line that he just created. And he said, each strike was not wasted. The stone was changing beneath the surface. And not only was the stone being transformed, so was the one who wields the hammer. And the reason why I like that story so much is that this is the meditative arts. We don't always see the change happening day to day, but through our consistency and our effort and the repetition, we're laying the foundation to reap the benefits of the practice for the rest of our lives. And so you need to approach this practice with that idea that you need to integrate this into your life and make it part of the way you live. And if you do that, I promise you, you'll see so many benefits. It'll be one of the best things you ever do. And then the third and final consideration is understanding that you need to find a guide and somebody to help you along this journey because there's a million videos out there on YouTube. There's many books out there on the practice. And if you think that you're going to be able to sift through all of that material and find what's best for you and that's going to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish in the shortest amount of time, you're going to waste a lot of years trying to find anything that's even going to get you to scratch the surface. Whereas if you have somebody in your corner that's showing you the shortest path and helping you integrate things that are focused on what you want to accomplish, you can get so much more out of your time. And in fact, through the years, I've seen people come into the academy that have been self-taught, sometimes 10 and 15 years of consistent practice they've had, and they're barely scratching the surface compared to somebody who's been under an instruction of a experienced guide for 6 or 12 months. And so these three things, understanding what the driver is or the why or the reason why you want to do the practice, coming to the practice with the mindset that this is a consistent thing and something that I'm committing to, and then having somebody in your corner, if you really put that time in thought in those three areas, you're so much more likely to be successful with the practice. And if you do that, I promise you, it'll be one of the best things you ever do for yourself.
I really like where you talked about why. And it's really a very powerful question to ask yourself. It provides such a great foundation to be able to commit and see the benefits. And I really like how you talked about the 20 negatives. If you did nothing today, what would that be in 12 months' time? How would you be managing, and the benefits, do they outweigh the negatives of doing nothing? I think that's such a beautiful way of approaching doing something new and working out why I want to do this. What benefit or what am I looking for as a result? So thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that really gives our listeners something to grab hold of, something to really bite their teeth into before starting this practice, having an intention set. And I know you teach what you call the 5 basic regulations that sit underneath any meditative practice. Can you walk us through what those regulations are in simple everyday language?
Yeah, these are fundamental foundations in any meditation practice, whether it's a sitting practice, a movement practice like Tai Chi or yoga or qigong. And by focusing on these and understanding these, they will help deepen your practice and you'll get a lot more value out of it. They are regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. First, we'll look at regulating the body. This is where a lot of meditation practices start people because it's the one that you'll see the most immediate results from. And basically, it's the idea of your foundation and your structural alignment, your ability to control the relaxation and tension in the body, and our overall body awareness. An example of this could be, think of a time when you're sitting down at your computer and you've been there for 3 or 4 hours and your shoulders are rounded forward and you're feeling lethargic and maybe your neck's getting stiff. And then another time, maybe you're out to dinner with friends or the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these two different energetic states are we're in 100% control of all day, every day, in our ability to recognize when we start slunching or when we start kind of folding into these energy draining postures is a big part of our overall body awareness. Within this, now it's not just about the alignment and the tension, but on a little bit of a deeper level is maintaining some sort of muscular structure in the body. So we're supporting the joints through movement. We're maintaining some sort of flexibility in the body so our joints stay mobile and active so we can move freely, and then getting the appropriate nutrients to help us keep energized and getting enough sleep. All of these are part of that body regulation. Then we have regulating the breath. And regulating the breath is a very deep topic. And in fact, qigong is often referred to as the science of the breath because there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies. And we use these breathing strategies to control our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And because there's so many different strategies, we kind of broadly categorize them into yin methods and yang methods. Yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style meditations. An example of a yin breath would be if you've ever listened to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And this is the body's natural way of bringing our conscious mind into our subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. And so if we want to tap into this inward style of energetic expression in our meditation practice, we can lengthen the inhales, add soft retentions at the end of the inhale to help bring that energy inward. And this is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety, with panic attacks. It's good for boosting our creativity. There's lots of different reasons why we would focus on this yin side of the breath. Then we have the yang side of the breath, which is more aggressive. It's expanding. It's bringing that energy outward. And an example of that would be if you've ever had to push your car or you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is to exhale, put tension in the breath, maybe even make it audible. And this helps generate that fire, that expansion in the energy. And so when we start understanding how to use the breath strategically, now when we have those emotional ups and downs throughout the day, like many of us always do, when we start noticing these excitement stages, we can use the yin breath to bring us back down. When we start feeling depleted, we can use the yang breath to help energize us. Then the next regulation is regulating the mind. And we touched on this a little bit when we talked about being distracted in our meditation practice and coming back to center. You know, there's these two old monks who are walking down a dirt road after a huge rainstorm. They come up to this big mud puddle, and on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl who's standing there in a white dress, and she's crying. And the older monk, he hollers across the puddle and he says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." And so the older monk, he rolls up his pant legs, he walks across the puddle, picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, sets her down, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a few miles down the road, and finally the younger monk is just furious, and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk looks down and says, "You're still carrying that girl around? I left her back there at the puddle." And how many times in life do we need to get 3 miles down the muddy road before we realize we need to let that thing go? And so understanding how to regulate these imbalances in the mind is an extremely powerful part of our meditation journey. And then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. This is a very deep topic and something that we could literally talk for hours about. But the basic idea is once we've reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, we now have the tools to circulate the energy in the body, to lead it inward, to extend it outwards. And we can use this for different meditation practices, for regulating our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. There's lots of ways how we can utilize this idea of our energetic expression. And then the last regulation is regulating the spirit. And this is a very profound idea, and it's something that meditation practitioners will spend their entire life's journey working towards deeper levels of this awareness. But there's a lot of life applicable directions that we can take this regulation. So for example, you've probably heard the term flow state before for athletes. Well, this flow state is our ability to stay present, stay relaxed, stay focused, and be away from these outside distractions. You'll hear athletes say things like, "Oh, it just seemed easy," or "Everything came together," or I just knew I could make it." And this idea of being more connected to the spirit helps us find those places and those times where we're in that flow state. And that's one of the reasons why so many athletes turn to the meditative arts to help them see those higher levels of awareness to improve their performance. And so you can see by just a basic idea of these 5 regulations that in cultivating them and improving our awareness in these areas, it can change anything we do in life.
I think before, when you were talking about the two monks and the puddle, it made me smile when you were talking about the little girl in the white dress. My initial thought was she was sad because she wanted to jump in the puddle. She wanted to have joy in that moment. And I think as you were progressing through that story, I was like, so a carer's journey, the younger monk. Because when we leave something We haven't left it behind because we have so many things that we still have to do, especially if there's been a medical emergency, the trauma, and you're replaying, did I tell that person the right thing? And it's so applicable to our situations as carers because as advocates, you want to get it right. You want to do the best job that you possibly can. And so, from my interactions with other carers and along this journey of that I've been on for the last 14 years, that is something that I hear often. That whilst other people are able to step aside and leave it there, the rumination of how I could do it better, what didn't I ask, what did I forget, is something that as carers, I think we need to really honor, acknowledge, but then also through these 5 practices, stop and let go. Because I think it does follow us through the day, sometimes weeks, especially if you're in hospital for a long time. So for a caregiver listening in the car or while they're doing the dishes, could you share an example of what it might look like to practice just one of those regulations for 60 to 90 seconds in real life?
There's many different things that you can do in what I call active practices. A ritual practice is where we set time aside every day, and that could be 20 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be whatever works for you. And that's kind of like the core of your practice that you want to do on a regular basis all the time, and that's your foundation. But then we want to have active practices or reset practices that we can do throughout the day to help us stay present and help us stay focused. And there's different reset practices to help us accomplish different goals. And so as we start understanding and listening to the body and noticing if we're getting excited or we're feeling depleted or we want to be more focused or whatever the reason why we're turning to this is, we can integrate some of these practices that will help us down that path. Something that's just real simple that anybody can do. There's different kinds of breathing practices. There's one breathing practice called normal abdominal breathing. And this is the natural way, if you ever watch a baby breathe, their belly is moving up and down. Many adults are breathing with their chest because they have so much tension. Their abdomen's always tight and they're not using their full lung capacity because they're under this pressure and this tension. And so one of the things that I will have my students do often is set an alarm to go off every 60 or 90 minutes on their phone and just count out 10 to 20 normal abdominal breaths. And it's very simple. When you inhale, you think about the air filling up the lungs, the middle diaphragm is expanding down and the belly is expanding, the perineum is falling, everything is relaxed. And then when you exhale, the belly lightly contracts, the perineum lightly lifts, and the lungs empty. And if you just do that for 60 or 90 seconds, you'll notice a huge change of bringing your awareness back to center. And this is something simple that anybody can do. And it comes back to what we talked about consistency. If you do this on a regular basis and really tap into that feeling and that awareness that's gained through that, and not be doing this breathing while you're scrolling through your phone, set your phone down, just relax and be present. Listen to the body. You'll get a lot out of that, and it's a great practice. With the breath, as with a movement in meditation, I like to look at it like not an inhale and an exhale is a 2-count thing. If you've ever watched the Discovery Channel and you've seen a flower in bloom where they'll take 1,000,000 pictures from the time that it's in a bud till when it blooms up and comes into life, think about your breath, and the inhale is 1,000,000 pictures from the start of the inhale to the end of the inhale. And everything in the body is coming to life. You're feeling the cells wake up. You're feeling the torso expand. You're seeing the let go across the chest and the shoulders. All of these little things that are happening that we often never pay attention to, and just listen to how the body is responding when we do that relaxed, deep breathing. And if you do that, your awareness will become more in tune. You'll be more heightened in what you're doing, and it will really help bring you more into the present moment, which will help you in those scenarios when it is chaotic and there's all this stuff going on and you feel like all the pressure. This is an important note. is I'll have people all the time who will come to me and say, when I get stressed out, what should I do? Or when I have a panic attack, what should I do? And while there are things that we can do to help in those scenarios, if you don't have a regular practice and you don't have the foundation and the awareness of what it takes to implement these things under those high stress environments, do you really think that under stress you're going to be able to make it work if you can't do it in silence and private? So you have to have that regular core practice to affect those times when we get stressed or we're in those stress environments. And the cool thing is, which is kind of like a two sides of the coin, in that not only does it help with the foundation, but because our foundation's getting stronger and our awareness is increasing. Now, when those high stress environments start taking us off track, rather than getting 5 minutes of being off track and realizing I need to change something, you notice it from the first few seconds you start going off track and you make those adjustments. And it's a lot easier to come back to center when you haven't gained too much negative momentum down any path. And so it's very powerful in that aspect.
Really appreciate how you're giving permission to start where a caregiver is at right now. Rather than needing to have perfect stillness, we can just have access to it right now, and we can actually add it to a habit that we're already doing. So habit stacking, so that it then becomes their normal day-to-day routine, and it's not something that appears to be adding on top of their day. So as they feel calmer, as they're able to access that breath in moments of calm, they then can see the ripple effect of those benefits to move towards having non-negotiable rest period for themselves to rejuvenate, to realign with themselves, and actually look forward to, be excited by taking those 20 minutes out to be focused on their nervous system, so that potentially when they wake up and do this practice, they're already in a great state to be in better stillness, better calm, better resilience than what they would have if their alarm went off and they're then running from one thing to another, and they don't have that time to pause and be present. So thank you so much for giving them something little that they can start with, so that they can then investigate it further and add it to part of their non-negotiable rest periods for the day. That is something that we really nurture and grow here, because we don't. We wait till every task is done before we go, "Oh, now I can rest." But by the end of the day, we could be overstimulated, we could be stressed, we could be feeling unwell because we forgot to eat along the way. And so I think by giving them permission to start here, they're being given permission to allow rest to be a non-negotiable care method for themselves. And I know you also talked about 3 different types of meditation: ritual, active, and philosophical. I think that's really helpful for people who think meditation only counts when you're on a cushion with your eyes closed. Could you explain the 3 types of meditation you work with and give an example of each one?
Yes. So what you're referring to is different ways that when we start creating an evolving life practice with the meditative arts, there are ritual practices, and there's many different meditations and styles of meditation that you can do that could be a ritual practice. To give you a few examples, one could be, like you mentioned, sitting on a cushion with your eyes closed and breathing. Another could be doing a Tai Chi form, or a yoga practice, or a qigong practice, or maybe some walking meditation or a standing meditation. There's many things we can do as a ritual form of practice in meditation. Then we have active practices, and these are great tools because they can be done when you're walking down the street or standing in line at the grocery store. And they could be as simple as, like we just talked about, with that normal abdominal breathing, or maybe some energetic circulations that we're doing in the body, or maybe some mental training things that we're doing with the mind. And then lastly, we have our philosophical side of the training, which is sometimes used in active practices and sometimes used in ritual practices. And it can be as simple as a mantra that you say to yourself, or it could be a saying that's helping you understand strategy in a little bit of a deeper level. There's many different forms of philosophical practice that we do. For example, one of my longtime meditation teachers, he used to have me memorize these sayings all the time. And one series of sayings that I memorized was from, have you ever heard of the Tao Te Ching?
I haven't, no.
Okay. The Tao Te Ching is a very famous book, supposedly written by Lao Tzu, a book of 81 sayings, and the only book in the history of mankind that has been printed and has more translations is the Bible. And so it's a very well-known book for anybody studying philosophy. So part of my training was memorizing that book. And every day I would go through those 81 sayings in my head. And the beautiful thing about that is that you'll hear a saying, for example, a way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. Names can be given, but not permanent labels. Non-being is called the beginning of heaven and earth. Being is called the mother of all things. Always passionless, thereby observe the subtle. Ever intent, thereby observe the apparent. These two come from the same source, but differ in name. Both are considered mysteries. The mystery of mysteries is the gateway to marvels. Now, you might hear that the first time and think, wow, that means a couple things. I see that. That's interesting. But then you start saying that and repeating it over and over again. And a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, you're like, there's so much in there I never even thought of, and you start seeing multiple angles. And for me, there's 5 paths in a meditation practice. You can do it for the performance side, the therapeutic side, the medical side, the philosophical side, and the meditative or spiritual side. And for me, I've always been kind of fond of the philosophical side because it helps expand your vision to see things from multiple angles and make you more strategic. And it keeps it fun. And when you're talking about those 3 different areas, as we start to create an evolving life practice, we'll take whatever our ritual is at the time, some of these active practices that we're weaving in and out the day, and then some of these philosophical practices, and we start creating a lifestyle. And from that lifestyle, it's always evolving because we're reaching deeper levels of realization along the way, and we're adjusting how we do certain things. And that's the idea behind that.
I love how you're reframing meditation as something that can live inside our movement, our thinking, and our little rituals. It doesn't have to be this separate, perfect practice. And we've covered a lot of ideas. And I'd love to bring this right down to earth for the caregivers listening who is exhausted, short on time, and maybe a bit wary of trying again. If a listener is wondering, what is the best meditation practice for me? How do you suggest they start to answer that question compassionately?
It's different for so many people in that you can't have one right answer for everybody. And so it goes back to the 3 considerations. And once you understand your why and the importance of consistency, you need to find a guide to help you with that, because that's one of those things where if you try to do it on your own, you could spend years just treading water and never getting anywhere. But if you have somebody in your corner that's helping, giving you an example of, here's the roadmap, where do you want to go? These are the things that are going to help us get there. That's where you're going to get the most effort out of your time.
I want to just tweak that a little bit to stick with meditation. What might be a very simple, sustainable starting point to look for a guide in terms of how long, how often, how do you find that right someone to help you get started?
You could find somebody in your local area and go out there and test a few places out. For me, I think it's important to find somebody that does not think that there's one path and that this is the only path that we should do and everybody should follow the same path. There's so many beautiful practices out there. And just at my academy alone here, I've had over 26,000 students come through my academy, and not counting all of the people I've helped online. And if I was to tell everybody to do the same thing, I don't think I would have helped half as many people as I have, because they just wouldn't have clicked with that. And so when you understand what it is you want to follow, having somebody who's educated that can help show you some different directions is important. So find somebody that's open to multiple different ideas, and then also find somebody that you feel comfortable working with, whether it's online or it's in person,
Mhm.
and put your trust in them and follow until you realize that for sure this isn't the path for you, or you love it and you want to just continue down that path.
So what I'm hearing is that meditation can become a customized toolkit rather than like a one size fits all rule book. And that feels really empowering, especially for people whose lives don't fit the usual mold. We've talked about a couple or a lot of concepts, but at the heart of this are real people. Carers, partners, parents who are tired and carrying a lot. If you were sitting with one exhausted caregiver right now who feels like they've lost themselves in the constant stress, what would you most want them to take away from your work?
It's my desire and my main goal with every person that walks in this door that I can show them to see the benefits of this practice enough to where I can get them to do a regular practice for at least a year every day. And if I can do that, then whether they continue with me or not, they're going to do this practice most of the time for the rest of their life. And so for me, it's how do I get people to see the value so they put the belief in it and in themselves and do this and start looking at this as something they get to do and that they're excited about rather than something that they have to do because Jeff told them they should do it. And if I can do that, I feel like I won.
I think when we look at it from the perspective of an experience to alter the way we approach day to day and the benefits that will flow on from that, a year sounds like an awfully long time when you're looking at it as a short term investment. But when you actually look at, for example, 14 years of caregiving, a year doesn't really sound that long for peace and calm for the rest of that journey. And I think if we look at it as this long term investment that we're doing and why we care, understanding that our needs have to come first in order for us to continue that longevity, a year of investment to try, test, and see and reap the rewards of a commitment to oneself is simply beautiful. And I think if we reframe it that way, it's really a small period of time to change how you present and show up in the chaos. And I really want to hone in on, is there one tiny realistic practice you'd invite them to experiment with over the next week? Something that doesn't require perfect conditions, that then gets them to be more intrigued, to explore and research how this practice might benefit their caregiving journey?
Yeah, I think what we talked about earlier with the normal abdominal breathing and that reset where you just program your phone to go off every 60 or 90 minutes and you count out 10 or 15 breaths, do that every day for the next week. And I would be surprised if you didn't see some great things from that. And if that's the case, maybe you might want to look into seeing what else is there because, that's really just barely the tip of the iceberg.
And really, in that week, I think it would be great for a carer to be aware of what's changing if they apply that practice of doing the abdominal breathing. What am I seeing that's different? So that at the end of the week, it's not like, oh, I was just doing breath work and I don't know what's different. Taking a cognitive moment to realize how I feel in my body before I start and then how I feel in my body at the end of that period, for them to really be able to weigh up the pros and the cons to create their why. Jeff, I wanted to say thank you for bringing such a grounded, compassionate approach to meditations and the meditative arts. I know many listeners will feel more hopeful about finding something that works for their real lives. We talked about the 5 regulations, the 3 types of meditation, and the idea of becoming a yielding warrior, someone who can meet life's intensity with a mix of softness and strength. If you'd like to explore more of Jeff's work, you can find him at The Yielding Warrior. I'll pop his website and all of his links in the show notes so you can explore when you have the space to. If something in this episode resonated with you, your only invitation is to notice one moment in your day where you can pause for a breath, adjust your posture, or soften your gaze, and let that be enough today. Jeff, thank you again for being here. To everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. Your care, your love, and your very real limits are all welcome here. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments. Until next time, take care of your radiant moments and of yourself.